My name is Joachim Morkant. This story is based on a real patrol call in a Midwestern city of about 150,000 people. Names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. This is not a statement of guilt, only an examination of behavior, contradictions, and deception as observed during police patrol. I am a patrol police officer, and this is Lie to Me. Fear doesn't always lie, but it doesn't always tell the truth either. And sometimes the most convincing story is the one built around what could have happened, not what actually did. I was on the highway checking on a fatal crash, not dispatched, just making sure the officers on scene were okay and didn't need further assistance, when this call came in. Domestic violence, weapon involved. Dispatch advised that a wife had used a sword against her husband. At that point, the severity was unclear. All we knew was that there was a domestic violence incident, a sword or bladed weapon had been used, and the severity and appearance of injuries were unknown. Those calls don't get minimized. When we arrived, my partner went with the husband who was outside. I went with the wife who was standing on the porch. That separation is important in these types of calls. The wife, Alma, approximately 30 years old, was on the porch with her mother. Her mother was an elderly white woman. Alma appeared Middle Eastern, with olive skin, dark hair, visible tattoos, and facial piercings. Nothing about her presentation was alarming. She looked like a fairly average Midwestern woman. Alma told me that her husband, Brian, had become extremely aggressive in the basement where they lived. She said he was yelling, flipping tables, acting out of control. She stated the home belonged to her mother and that they lived in the basement. She said she became fearful he would become violent towards her. I asked what started the argument. Her answers were vague. She never articulated what was said, what triggered the escalation, why the argument began. After several attempts, it became clear she wasn't going to provide that information. That doesn't automatically mean deception, but it does limit reliability. Alma said they went to the ground during a scuffle. That phrasing can be important. People often use it to describe mutual grappling, defensive contact, or to soften the description of violence. But going to the ground by itself does not automatically establish domestic violence. Up to this point, Alma had said nothing about a sword. That was the elephant in the room. After she finished her account, I asked directly and carefully, where did the sword come into play during this incident? Alma said the sword was only for protection. She stated she retrieved it, held it between herself and Brian, and that Brian walked away. According to her version, no strikes occurred, no injuries occurred, no domestic violence occurred. At face value, that would mean there would not be an arrest, a simple separation for the night would be acceptable, and a brief memo documenting the threats would suffice. After this, however, I spoke to my partner. This is when the story changed. Brian had facial injuries, a bite mark on his stomach, a cut on his left side. Those injuries were visible and documented. Alma had mentioned none of this, not the bite, not the cut, not the facial injuries. Omitting injuries, especially when a weapon is involved, is not accidental. At that point, we had observable injuries, consistent injury patterns, no injuries on Alma, a weapon involved, and probable cause for both domestic violence and felonious assault due to the assault having been afflicted with a weapon. Legally, once probable cause exists for domestic violence, officers are obligated to make an arrest. This is not discretionary for officers in my state. When we returned to the porch and informed Alma she was under arrest, her mother immediately intervened. She said Brian's injuries were self-inflicted, that she witnessed him do this, and that we should believe her because she later added that she was an evangelist for a heavy metal Church of Jesus Christ. The implication was clear. I'm religious, I'm a witness, and you should trust me. Brian could not have bitten himself on the stomach, and he could not have cut his own side with a sword that he never held. False corroboration is one of the most dangerous forms of deception because it attempts to override physical evidence. Alma was placed in handcuffs and secured in the police cruiser. My partner completed the domestic violence packet with Brian. Brian was upset about the incident, but he became far more upset when he learned Alma was being arrested. This reaction is common. People often want the violence to stop, but not the consequences. In domestic violence cases, police arrest based on probable cause. Arrests do not, however, equal conviction. The victim must later go to the prosecutor to press charges. If they don't, the suspect is released, no conviction occurs. In this case, Brian did not follow through. During transport, Alma was calm. We talked. She told me that her father was Syrian. He disappeared after she was born. She had experienced domestic violence in a prior relationship. That history likely played in a large factor to this incident as well. I believe that Alma was afraid. I believe Brian was aggressive and maybe verbally aggressive. I believe her past trauma influenced how she interpreted this situation, but fear does not equal fact. And based on the evidence, Brian did not physically harm her. All physical injuries were inflicted by Alma. This case is difficult because two things can be true at the same time. Someone can be genuinely afraid and still be the one who committed violence. Fear explains behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. Here's the reality for patrol police officers and what we face. You do not arrest based on who's more afraid. You arrest based on injuries, evidence, and what actually happened. And sometimes the lie isn't about denying violence. It's about reframing it as self-defense, even when the facts don't support that